Welcome to the Pursuit Chronicles, where hidden truths, bold journeys, and untold stories come to life. Get ready to chase the extraordinary. Imagine you're a successful owner of a luxury hotel, proud of everything you've built. One day, you decide to visit your hotel, unexpectedly curious to see it through the eyes of your guests, but upon your arrival, something shocking happens. You're treated like an outsider, ignored by the staff, and Ian denied service there. As in the color of your skin, you stand there, stunned as they look down on you, without realizing who you really are, the owner of the very hotel they're working. For that's exactly what happened to a successful black woman named Sarah. What would you do in that moment? How would you handle the injustice? Knowing the power you hold over them, keep watching to find out what happens next. But I promise it's not what you think. One day, she decided to visit her hotel dressed in simple clothes just to see how the staff treated everyday people. But something unexpected happened. The staff refused to serve her. They looked at her and judged her by her skin color and clothes, not knowing she was their boss. How do you think she felt? What do you think she'll do about it? Will she fire them, confront them? Keep watching too. Find out. You'll be surprised to learn that what happens next is not what you think. The glass doors of the luxurious Crystal Palm Hotel glided open as Sarah stepped inside. She had been the proud owner of this five-star hotel for almost 3 years, but today she wanted to experience it differently. No fancy suit, no chauffeur, no special treatment, just her in comfortable jeans, a plain shirt, and sneakers. The lobby was breathtaking with its shimmering chandeliers and polished marble floors. The walls were covered in elegant art, and the sweet smell of fresh flowers filled the air. Guests were being greeted with smiles and warm welcomes. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. Sarah strolled up to the front desk, ready to ask for a room she wanted, to see how the staff would treat a regular guest. But before she could even speak, a tall young man in a fancy uniform glanced at her and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, but this hotel isn't for people like you." Her heart stopped for a second. People like you? What was that supposed to mean? Sarah blinked, confused. She smiled politely and asked, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" The man's expression turned cold. "This is a luxury hotel. We have ascertained standard of guests here. Maybe you'd like to try a place down the street. They offer more affordable accommodations." The word stung. Was this really happening? Her mind raced. Was he refusing to serve her because of her simple clothes, or was it something else? Sarah had experienced subtle racism before, but here in her own hotel, she took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse. She could easily reveal who she was. She could drop her name and watch the man's face turned pale as he realized his mistake. But she decided to wait. She needed to see how deep this went. "You sure?" she asked, her voice calm but with a slight edge. "I've heard this hotel is one of the best. I'm willing to pay." The man didn't budge. "Like I said, we have a standard. Perhaps you'd feel more comfortable at a different place." He didn't even bother to check for available rooms. Sarah felt the fire rising in her chest, but instead of snapping, she just nodded. "All right then." She walked away from the desk, feeling the weight of every step she took. She wasn't angry just yet, more stunned than anything. My own staff refusing me service. She wondered if the issue was just with this one man or if the entire hotel had a problem. She wasn't about to let this go, not yet. Standing near the entrance was a well-dressed couple, clearly guests of the hotel. The front desk staff greeted them with big smiles, immediately offering assistance, checking their reservation and carrying the airbags. So it's not about the rooms being full. Sarah thought. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her assistant Rachel. "Everything running smoothly at the hotel." Sarah smirked, quickly typing back, "I wish we have a problem." She wasn't going to involve Rachel just yet. First, she had to get to the bottom of this on her own. Instead of leaving, Sarah headed to the hotel's restaurant. She decided to sit down and observe how others were treated. Maybe this was just an isolated incident. She hoped it was. She approached the hostess stand where a young woman with a polite but distant expression stood. "Hi, could I get a table, please?" Sarah asked. The hostess glanced at her, her eyes scanning Sarah's outfit from head to toe. A small frown appeared on her face. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, but I thought I could just—" "We fully booked." The hostess cut her off, her tone flat and uninterested. Sarah peeked past the host and saw at least 5 empty tables. "I see there are some tables available," she pointed out, keeping her voice steady. The hostess didn't even turn to look. "They're reserved this time." Sarah couldn't hold back her frustration. "You didn't even check the system? Are you sure they're reserved?" The hostess crossed her arms, looking bored. "Yes, Mom, they're reserved." Sarah took a deep breath. She was done playing. Nice, she knew this hotel like the back of her hand. Every table, every staff member, every policy. She had poured her heart and soul into this place, but as she was being treated like an outsider, she leaned in slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Are you refusing to seek me because of the way I look, or is it something else?" The hostess didn't respond. Right away. But the look in her eyes said it all. There was no apology, no sign of reconsidering. Sarah's heart pounded. How many other guests have been treated like this? She wondered. It was clear that this wasn't just one staff member's attitude there. Was something much bigger going on here. She decided to leave the restaurant area, her mind racing with ideas of what she should do. Next, should she call a staff meeting? Right now, should she fire people on the spot? Her instincts told her to keep digging. She wanted to know how deep this problem ran. Just as she was about to head toward the elevator to visit the upper floors, something extreme happened. The same man from the front desk walked over, this time with 2 security guards beside him. "Ma'am, we need to ask you to leave the premises," he said firmly. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me, this is private property, and we have the right to refuse service to anyone," he said, his voice a little louder. Now, drawing the attention of other guests in the lobby. Security guards, really. They were treating her like a troublemaker in her own hotel, and that's when Sarah knew this was more than just a bad day. This was a full-blown problem, and she wasn't going to let it slide, but instead of exploding in anger, or revealing her identity right away. Sarah did something surprising. She took a step back, smiled, and said, "All right, I'll leave." But as she walked out of the grand lobby, she knew exactly what she was going to do next, and it wasn't what anyone expected. What will Sarah do next? How will she handle this unfair treatment? Keep watching to find out. You'll be shocked at what happens next. Sarah walked out of the Crystal Palm Hotel with her head held high, though inside she was boiling with anger and disbelief. As the cool evening air brushed against her skin, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: humiliation, frustration, and sadness. How could her own hotel, the one she had worked so hard to build from the ground up, treat her like she didn't belong? And how many other guests had faced this kind of treatment without her knowing? The sound of traffic hummed in the background as Sarah stood just outside the grand entrance. The city lights flickered and people bustled past, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded inside. She could feel the weight of what had just happened sinking in deeper with every passing moment, but she wasn't the type to sulk or get lost in her emotions for long. With a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and dialed Rachel, her assistant, if anyone could help her figure out what to do. Next it was, "Rachel, hey, Sarah, Rachel," answered her voice, cheerful as usual. "How's the hotel tonight?" "Everything running smoothly." Sarah paused for a moment, collecting her thoughts before speaking. "Rachel, I need you to meet me at the office tomorrow morning. We've got a big problem." Rachel's tone immediately shifted to concern. "Problem? What's going on?" "It's hard to explain over the phone, but there's something seriously wrong with how the staff is treating guests. I just got kicked out of my own hotel," Sarah explained, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wait, what? Kicked out?" How Sarah briefly told her what had happened from the front desk, clerk refusing to serve her, to being escorted out by security. Rachel was speechless. "Oh my gosh, that's insane." Rachel finally said, "We need to handle this right away." "What are you thinking?" "I want to see how deep this issue goes. If this is how someone who looks out of place, then we could be losing guests without even realizing it, and we can't afford to have that kind of reputation," Sarah explained. "Should I schedule a staff meeting, maybe talk to the manager?" "No, not yet," Sarah replied. "I need to see it for myself, from the inside. I want to go undercover. "You mean like pretending to be a guest?" "Exactly. I want to experience what a regular guest goes through, not just the nice parts, but the parts where they might be overlooked or mistreated. But I'll need your help to set it up." Rachel agreed without hesitation. "Of course, Sarah, I'm on it. Let's meet tomorrow and come up with a plan." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a new sense of determination rise within her. She wasn't just going to fix the problem, she was going to make sure this never happened again, not to her, and certainly not to any other guest. This hotel was a dream and no one was going to ruin it. The next morning, Sarah sat in her office with Rachel going over the details of their plan. The sleek office with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern decor overlooked the city skyline. A reminder of everything Sarah had accomplished, but right now all she could focus on was the problem at hand. Rachel had already booked a room. For Sarah Hunder, a fake name, she would arrive at the hotel later that evening, not as the owner, but as an anonymous guest. Sarah would take note of every interaction, from check-in room service to see if the issue was bigger than just a few staff members. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Retail asked, glancing at Sarah with concern. "I mean, after what happened last night," Sarah nodded firmly. "I have to. I can't run a hotel. That treats people like they don't belong. You need to know how far this goes." Rachel leaned back in her chair, looking thoughtful. "If anyone can get to the bottom of this, it's you. Just be careful. Okay, I don't want to see you get hurt again. I'll be fine." Sarah assured her, though deep down she was still hurt from the previous night. But that pain only fueled her determination later. That evening, Sarah stood in front of the Crystal Palm Hotel, once again this time. Dressed a little differently, she wore a casual dress and a pair of sunglasses. Nothing too fancy, but nothing too plain either. She wanted to blend in, to be seen as just another guest walking in off the street as she entered the hotel. She couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Would she be treated the same way as last night, or had something changed? The lobby was just as grand as ever, with its glittering chandeliers and sparkling floors. A soft melody played in the background as guests checked in, mingled, and waited for service. Sarah approached the front desk, her heart pounding just a little faster than usual. A different employee was working this time, a young woman with a friendly smile. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe things would be different tonight. "Hi, welcome to the Crystal Palm Hotel. How can I help you?" the woman asked warmly. "I have a reservation under..." "The name's Tha Jones," Sarah replied using her alias. The woman quickly typed into the computer, her smile never fading. "Ah, yes, I see it. There, you're all set for a 2-night stay. Would you like assistance with your bags?" Sarah declined politely, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. The check-in process had gone smoothly this time. Maybe last night had just been an unfortunate misunderstanding, but she wasn't ready to relax just yet. She headed up to her room, eager to see if the rest of her stay would be just as seamless. The room was perfect. Large windows offered a stunning view of the city, and the elegant furnishings made it clear that this was no ordinary hotel. Sarah sat on the edge of the plush bed, thinking over the events of the last 24 hours. Things seemed better so far, but she still had a nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something didn't add up. As the evening wore on, Sarah decided to call room service for dinner. She wanted to test every aspect of the hotel service. Picking up the phone, she ordered a simple meal, a grilled chicken sandwich with a side of fries. "Thank you for your order, Miss Jones. It'll be up in about 30 minutes, the voice on the other end said. Exactly 30 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Sarah opened. To find a middle-aged man with a cart dressed in the hotel's standard room service uniform. He smiled politely as he handed her the tray, but as she reached for it, she noticed something odd. His smile faltered for just a second, and his eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite place judgment. "Maybe." "Here's your order, ma'am," he said, his voice tight. "Thank you," Sarah said, tipping him generously. The man took the tip, but his expression didn't change. He lingered by the door for a moment longer than necessary. Before finally turning and leaving, Sarah closed the door, her mind buzzing with questions. Was she overthinking it, or was there something more to that brief exchange? She couldn't shake the feeling that the staff treated certain guests differently based on how they looked or acted. As she sat down to eat her meal, a sudden knock interrupted her thoughts. This time it wasn't room service, it was security. 2 uniformed security guards stood at her door, their faces stern and unwelcoming. Miss Jonas, one of them, asked. "Yes, that's me. Is there a problem?" Sarah asked, confused. "We've received a complaint about your presence in the hotel. You need to come with us." Sarah's heart raced. Another complaint. Just like last night, but this time she wasn't going to leave quietly. What will Sarah do next? Will she reveal her true identity? Or is there something else in store? Stay tuned to see how this situation escalates. You won't believe what happens next. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as the two security guards stood firmly. Author door, before we continue the story, please click on the like and subscribe button so you won't miss out on amazing stories like this. Thank you. Their presence was intimidating, and the way they had framed their demand left her feeling small, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But this wasn't a time for fear. This was a moment for clarity. A wave of calm washed over her as she decided how to respond. Her mind raced as he remembered the similar situation from the night before. Then she had walked away quietly, not wanting to escalate the situation, but this was different. Now she had the full weight of her undercover experience behind her, and she knew she needed to take control. "I'm sorry, what complaint?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice calm but firm. The taller of the two guards, a burly man with a clean-shaven face, glanced at a clipboard he was holding. "We received a call from management about suspicious behavior. They want you to leave the premises." Suspicious behavior. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "They still don't know who I am." She realized this wasn't just a mistake. It was becoming clear that the hotel had serious problems with discrimination. Sarah clenched her fists at her sides, her anger bubbling just beneath the surface, but she wasn't going to reveal her identity just yet, not until she knew exactly how deep this issue ran. For now, she would play along. She needed more information, and she wasn't ready to pull the trigger on her plane just yet. "And what exactly did I do? That's suspicious?" she asked, her voice steady but her eyes locked on the guards. The second security guard, shorter and younger, seemed slightly uncomfortable with the situation. He shuffled his feet and glanced at his partner. "Oh, Mom, it's just a routine thing. We're following orders." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "So you're saying the management of this hotel sent you up here to remove me without explaining why, without giving me a chance to speak for myself?" The taller guard cleared his throat. "It's standard procedure. We don't ask questions. We just follow the instructions given by the hotel staff." The situation was becoming clearer by the minute. This wasn't just about one or two rude employees. The staff, or at least some of them, seemed to be operating on a deeply ingrained bias-passing judgment, based on looks rather than actions, and now they were escalating it with security without. "'Cause I see," Sarah said, nodding slowly. "Well, if I've done something wrong, I'd like to speak to the manager about it." The two guards exchanged glances. "That's not necessary," the taller one said clearly, trying to end the conversation. "We've been asked to escort you out." Sarah folded her arms, standing her ground. "I'm not going anywhere until I've spoken to someone in charge." Her voice had shifted, carrying an air of authority she hadn't used earlier. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was the owner, even if they didn't know it yet, and it was time to start acting like it. The taller guard hesitated. "Ma'am, we can't," but before he could finish, another voice entered the conversation. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah turned to see. A well-dressed man approaching the hotel manager. Robert recognized him immediately, though he clearly didn't recognize her. His suit was pressed, and his face bore the carefully composed expression of someone used to dealing with high-end guests. Leaf washed over the younger guard's face as Robert stepped forward. "This guest was asked to leave, and she's refusing to cooperate," the taller guard explained, already spinning the story in his favor. Robert turned his attention to Sarah, and for a split second, she saw the flicker of the same judgment she'd faced before. He didn't recognize her. He only saw another guest he assumed was causing trouble. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am," Robert said, his voice polite but distant, "but we have received some complaints. It would be best if you leave peacefully." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Complaints? Who had complained? The only interaction she'd had tonight was with room service, and that had been brief, if slightly uncomfortable. Was that all it took for them to decide she didn't belong? She took a deep breath. The time for subtlety was over. "Complaints?" Sarah asked, tilting her head slightly. "I'd love to hear what those complaints are, and I'd love to know why I'm being treated this way. Is it because of how I look?" Robert blinked, clearly caught off guard by her question. "No, Mom, it's not that. We've had reports of unusual behavior, and we're just following protocol." Sarah stepped forward, her eyes never leaving. "His unusual behavior, like what? Ordering room service, checking in under A perfectly valid reservation, or perhaps you're referring to the way undressed, or maybe the color of my skin. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Sarah's words hung in the air. The guard shifted uncomfortably, and even Robert's carefully composed expression cracked for a moment. "That's not what this is about, ma'am," Robert stammered. "We don't discriminate here." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Don't you? Last night I was refused service at the front desk and asked to leave the hotel by security. Tonight I'm being told I'm a problem guest even though I've done nothing wrong, and yet I've seen other guests, dressed much like me, receive the red carpet treatment." Robert's face turned pale as Sarah's words hit him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. "Do you know who I am?" Sarah asked, her voice quiet but powerful. The guards glanced at each other, confused, but Robert looked like he had just realized he'd made a terrible mistake. I don't," Robert stuttered clearly, panicking. Now Sarah took a deep breath. Her heart pounding. The moment had come. She hadn't wanted to reveal her identity like this, but she couldn't let this continue. "I'm Sarah Hamilton," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I own this hotel." For a moment, there was complete silence. The guards looked at each other in shock, while Robert's face turned an alarming shade of red. You're the owner," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, her eyes locked on his. "Yes, I am, and now I'd like an explanation as to why my staff has been treating me, and potentially other guests, so poorly." Robert opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was frozen, clearly not prepared for this situation. The two security guards stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of what to do. "I think you should leave us, Sarah," said, turning to the guards. They didn't hesitate. Within seconds, they were out the door, leaving Sarah alone with the manager. Robert fumbled for words, his polished demeanor crumbling. "Miss Hamilton, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. If I had known." "That's exactly the point," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm but calm. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with respect. The same goes for every guest who walks through those doors." Robert's eyes dropped to the floor, and he nodded, but Sarah wasn't done. "How many other guests have been treated this way?" she asked, her voice quiet now but full of intensity. "How many have been judged because they don't fit your idea of what a luxury guest looks like?" Robert swallowed hard, his face drenched in sweat. I don't know. I promise this isn't how we normally operate. There must have been some misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," Sarah cut in. "I experienced it last night, and I experienced it again tonight, and if it happened to me, it's happening to others." Robert was silent, his face a mix of embarrassment and fear. He knew he couldn't argue with her, but he also didn't know how to fix the situation. "You want a full investigation into how the staff is treating guests," Sarah said, her voice low but commanding, "and I want you to be part of it, because if we find that this has been happening to anyone else, there will be consequences." Robert nodded quickly, his face ashen. "Yes, of course. Miss Hamilton, I'll make sure it's done." Sarah stared at him for a moment longer, then turned toward the door. "I'll expect a report by the end of the week." She walked out of the room without another word, leaving Robert standing in stunned silence as she made her way down the hallway. Sarah felt a sense of relief, but also a new determination. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to uncover, and she wasn't going to stop until her hotel was a place where everyone was treated with respect, no matter who they were. But as she reached the lobby, her phone buzzed with a message. She glanced down, her stomach sinking as she read it. "There's more going on than you think. Meet me tomorrow at 9 a.m. In the office. We need to talk." It was from Rachel. What's the bigger problem Rachel has uncovered is there more going on behind the scenes at the hotel than Sarah realizes. "Keep watching. You won't believe what happens." Next, Sarah stared at her phone. Her heart pounding. Rachel's message was cryptic, but it set off alarm bells in her mind. What did she mean? There's more going on after everything Sarah had experienced over the past 48 hours? It seemed like the worst had already unfolded. What more could possibly be lurking beneath the surface? She took a deep breath, glancing around the lobby. The polished marble floors and glittering chandeliers now felt like a facade, hiding something much darker. She needed answers quickly, but first she had to rest. Her mind was spinning from the evening's events, and she needed to clear her head before meeting Rachel upstairs. She finally lay down in the luxurious bed of her suite, but sleep didn't come easily. Thoughts of the manager's panicked face, the security guards, unease, and Rachel's ominous message swirled in her head. There was no doubt now that something bigger was at play. The next morning Sarah woke early, the tension still hanging over her. Like a heavy cloud, she got dressed and made her way down to the office. A private room reserved for the hotel's executives and meeting. It was tucked away behind the main reception area, far from the eyes of the guests. When she arrived, Rachel was already there, seated at the long glass table, a folder of documents in front. Of her face was serious, her usual easygoing demeanor, replaced with concern. "Morning, Sarah," Rachel said quietly as Sarah entered. She motioned for her to sit. Sarah wasted no time. "What's going on, Rachel? What did you find?" Rachel hesitated for a moment. "Before sliding the folder across the table, I've been doing some digging, and I think we have a bigger problem than just a few rude staff members." Sarah opened the folder, her eyes scanning the pages. Quickly they were reports, employee files, and guest complaints, many of which echoed her own experience of discrimination. But there was something buried beneath the surface. The incidents you experienced, the ones where guests are mistreated based on how they look or dress, it's not random, Rachel said. Her voice low. "There's a pattern here." Sarah's brow furrowed. "A pattern," Rachel nodded, pointing to a section of the report. "It's subtle, but if you look closely, you'll see that certain types of guests, mostly people of color or those who don't fit the luxury image, are consistently being given worse service, and it's not just rudeness. Rooms are being downgraded, special requests are ignored, and complaints are brushed off." Sarah felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was systemic, and it was happening in her hotel. How could this be happening right under my nose? Sarah whispered more to herself than to Rachel. Rachel sighed. "It's hard to notice when you're not looking for it. Everything on the surface looks fine. The hotel has great reviews, most guests are happy, but the ones who aren't, they're just swept under the rug." Sarah clenched her fists. "Who's responsible for this?" Rachel hesitated again. "That's the part I don't know for sure. But I have a suspicion." She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "I think it's coming from someone high up, someone in management." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Could Robert, the manager who had so nervously apologized last night, be involved? Or was there someone else pulling the strings? "We need proof," Sarah said firmly. "If this is happening, I need solid evidence before I can take action." Rachel nodded. "I've already started gathering more data, but we'll need to dig deeper. This isn't just about confronting a few employees. If there's someone in management behind this, they've been covering their tracks carefully." Sarah's mind raced. She'd been so focused on her own experiences that she hadn't considered the possibility of a larger conspiracy, but now everything seemed to fit the rude receptionist. The security guard's unnecessary escalation, even Robert's awkward apology, there was something off about all of it. "What's our next step?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but determined. Rachel tapped the folder. "I've compiled a list of employees who've been mentioned in the complaints. I think we need to start talking to them quietly. We can't let management know what we're up to, not yet. If we're right and someone high up is involved, they'll try to shut this down before we can gather enough evidence." Sarah nodded, agreed. "Let's start with the staff on the list, but we need to be careful. If anyone catches wind of this investigation, they could start destroying evidence or silencing people." Rachel smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "I've got your back, Sarah. We'll get to the bottom of this." As they began planning their next steps, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the tip of the iceberg. If there was corruption in her hotel, it might go deeper than she ever imagined. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself sitting across from one of the employees on Rachel's list. Her name was Maria, and she had been working at the hotel as a housekeeper for nearly 5 years. Maria was nervous, fidgeting with the hem of her apron, but she agreed to speak with Sarah after hearing that the conversation would be confidential. "I don't want any trouble, Maria," said her voice low. "I need this job, but I've seen things." Sarah leaned in slightly, keeping her voice gentle. "You're not in any trouble, Maria. I just want to understand. What's been happening? Can you tell me what you've seen?" Maria hesitated, glancing around. The empty break room, before speaking, it's the way some guests are treated. Not everyone, just certain ones. The staff knows who they are. We're told not to go out of our way for them. Who tells you that? Sarah asked, her heart pounding. Maria shifted uncomfortably. It's not always direct. Sometimes it's just a look or a comment from the supervisors, but other times it's clear. They say things like, don't waste too much time on that guest, or make sure their room isn't too special. Sarah's blood boiled. It was worse than... She thought this wasn't just passive discrimination, it was an active effort to diminish the experience of certain Wests. Do you know who's giving these orders? Sarah pressed her voice, calm but firm. Maria bit her lip, clearly torn. I don't know for sure, but I've heard the name Mr. Adams come up a lot. Sarah's heart sank. Mr. Adams was the head of guest relations, one of the most senior managers in the hotel. If he was involved, this went straight to the top, thank you. Maria, Sarah said softly, you've been very brave. I promise you we'll make this right. As Maria left the room, Sarah sat back, her mind racing. Mr. Adams was well respected, a polished professional who'd been with the hotel for over a decade, but if he was behind this discrimination, it meant that the very foundation of the hotel's leadership was corrupt. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Rachel. I've got more info on Adams. Meet me in my office. ASAP. Sarah stood, her resolve hardening. She was done playing nice. If Mr. Adams was responsible for what was happening at the hotel, she was going to take him down. But as she headed toward Rachel's office, a dark thought crossed her mind. What if Mr. Adams wasn't working alone? Will Sarah uncover the full scope of the corruption within her hotel, and what role does Mr. Adams truly play in this twisted web? The answers might be more shocking than Sarah or anyone expects. Sarah hurried down the hallway toward Rachel's office, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and anticipation. The revelation about Mr. Adams had shaken her. If he was involved in the systematic mistreatment of certain guests, then this situation was more insidious than she could have ever imagined, and the thought that there might be others working with him only made her resolve stronger. As she reached Rachel's office door, she took a deep breath and knocked softly. The door opened almost immediately, and Rachel ushered her inside, her expressions serious. I've been digging through the employee records and guest complaints, like we discussed. Rachel said, not wasting any time. She handed Sarah a stack of papers, each one a detailed report tied to Mr. Adams. It's worse than we thought. Sarah sat down, flipping through the pages quickly. There were notes about guest interactions, employee feedback, and disturbingly several instances where guests had checked out early without explanation. Guests who fit the same profile Maria had described, people of color guests dressed more casually, those who didn't seem to meet the hotel's image of luxury. Adams has been running a quiet operation for years, Rachel said, pacing the room as Sarah read. It's subtle enough that it flies under the radar. Most guests just think they've had a bad experience or a rude employee, but the reality is much darker. Sarah paused. On one of the reports, this guest complained about being moved to a different room after requesting an upgrade, while Rachel leaned over her shoulder because they didn't fit. The look Mr. Adams wanted in the upgraded suites. The guest was polite, made their request properly, and even had the money to pay for it, but Adams had them downgraded. I checked, and this guest was a person of color. Sarah's anger flared. This wasn't just about customer service anymore. This was discrimination, plain and simple. How long has this been going on? She asked, her voice tight. At least 5 years based on the records I'd found, Riedel said. And I'm willing to bet it's been happening longer than that. He's careful, he doesn't leave a lot of direct evidence, but there's enough here to start building a case. Sarah set the papers down, her mind racing. 5 years. That meant this had been happening under her ownership the entire time. She felt a wave of guilt. How had she not seen this sooner? But she pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time for self-blame. She needed to act. We need to confront him, Sarah said firmly, but not without a plan. We can't just accuse him without hard evidence. Rachel nodded, agreed. I've been thinking about that. What if we gather witness statements from the employees who've seen this happening? People like Maria Eve. We can get enough of them to speak up. We'll have more than enough to take Adams down. Sarah considered this. It was risky asking employees to speak out against someone as powerful as Mr. Adams could backfire, but at the same time it might be the only way to expose the full extent of the problem. We need to do it carefully, Sarah said, standing up. We can't let Adams catch wind of this before we have enough to confront him. Rachel smiled slightly. I've already started reaching out to a few trust employees. Maria was just the beginning. There are others who've seen what's been going on and are willing to talk. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could bring the truth to light, but before she could respond, her phone buzzed. Again, another message. We need talk. Now meet me in the lobby. It was from Robert, the manager she had confronted the night before. Sarah frowned, showing the message to Rachel. What do you think he wants? Rachel asked, her brow furrowing. I'm not sure, Sarah replied, a knot forming in her stomach. But I'm going to find out. Sarah made her way to the lobby, her mind whirling with possibilities. Could Robert know about her investigation? Had Adams already caught wind of what was happening, or was this something else entirely? When she arrived, Robert was standing near the grand staircase, looking anxious. As soon as he saw her, he hurried over. Miss Hamilton, he said, his voice low and urgent. We need to talk privately. Sarah nodded, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the lobby. They sat down in two plush chairs, and Robert glanced around nervously before speaking. I don't know how to say this, but I think there's something you need to know about Mr. Adams, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was this? It was Robert, about to confirm her suspicions. I've worked here for almost 10 years. Robert continued, wringing his hands, and in that time I've seen things that, well, I probably should have spoken up about sooner. Go on, Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. Robert swallowed hard. Mr. Adams, he's been doing things behind the scenes, things that are, how do I put this, unethical. He's made deals with certain clients, ensuring they get preferential treatment, and, well, he's made it clear that other guests don't matter as much. Sarah's pulse quickened. Are you saying he's been discriminating against guests? Robert looked away, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe it was just coincidence, but over the years, it became harder to ignore. I tried to look the other way to keep my job, but you knew, Sarah interrupted, her voice tight. You knew this was happening, and you did nothing. Robert flinched, his face pale. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to stop it. Adams is powerful, and he's connected. If I had spoken up, I could have lost everything. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She wanted to yell, to demand why no one had stood up against this sooner. But she took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. What changed? Sheathed, her voice steady. Robert looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. I heard rumors that you were asking questions, looking into things. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Adams, he's been doing more than just discriminating against guests. There's something else going on. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What? Do you mean something else? Robert glanced around again, lowering his voice even more. There's been money missing, payments that don't add up. I've seen the records. I think Adams has been siphoning funds from the hotel. Sarah's mind reeled. This wasn't just about mistreating guests anymore. This was criminal. If Adams had been stealing from the hotel, he was putting her entire business at risk. Do you have proof? Sarah asked, her voice sharp. Robert nodded. I've copies of the financial records I've been keeping them hidden just in case. I didn't want to get involved. But now I can't stand by and let this continue. Sarah's head spun. This was bigger than she had imagined. If Adams was involved in both discrimination and embezzlement, he wasn't just unethical, he was dangerous. We need to act fast. Sarah said, standing up. I want those records. We're going to take Adams down. But as she turned to leave, Robert grabbed her arm, his face pale with fear. You don't understand, he whispered. Adams isn't working alone. Sarah froze. Her worst fears were confirmed. Who else is involved? Robert hesitated, glancing around again before leaning in close. There's someone higher up, someone who's been protecting Adams for years. If you go after him, you'll be taking on more than just one man. You'll be taking on the entire system. Who is the mysterious figure behind Mr. Adams? How deep does the corruption go? Sarah's eyes about to uncover the truth. But the consequences may be more dangerous than she ever imagined. Sarah stood frozen, the weight of Robert's words crashing over her like a tidal wave. Someone higher up. The thought sent chills down her spine. She had been prepared to confront Mr. Adams, but now she realized she was dealing with something much bigger. something that could potentially destroy her business or worse, put her in danger, who she asked, quietly leaning in close to Robert, who was protecting him. Robert glanced around the lobby nervously, his eyes darting to the entrance and back again. He lowered his voice even further, barely. Above a whisper, I don't know for certain, but I've heard rumors about someone on the board, someone with deep connections. They're powerful. Sarah, if you go after Adams without being careful, they'll come after you too. Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She was angry, furious, but now she understood the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just about cleaning up her hotel anymore. She was up against people who had power, people who wouldn't hesitate to protect their interests at any cost. I need those records, Robert, Sarah said firmly, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was racing. If there's someone else involved, we have to find out who they are and we have to expose them. Robert nodded, his face pale. I'll get them to you, but you have to be careful. I don't think you realize how dangerous these people can be. Sarah placed a hand on his arm, her expression serious. I do now, but I won't let them destroy what I've built, not without a fight later that afternoon. Sarah met Rachel back. In her office, she closed the door behind her, her mind still spinning from her conversation. With Robert, she hadn't even had time to process everything, but she knew one thing for certain. This went deeper than she ever could have imagined. Rachel, we have a problem, Sarah said, sinking into the chair across from her friend. It's not just Adams, there's someone higher up, someone protecting him. Rachel's eyes widened. Are you serious? Sarah nodded, recounting her conversation with Robert. He's going to get me the financial records, but if what he says is true, Adams isn't the only one involved. There's someone on the board, someone who's been covering for him. Rachel leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed. That changes everything. If this goes all the way to the top, it's going to be a lot harder to take Adams down, and if someone on the board is involved, they'll have the resources to fight back. I know, Sarah said quietly, her mind racing, but we can't let that stop us. We need to gather enough evidence to expose them. Both Adams and whoever's protecting him. Once we have proof, they won't be able to cover it up. Rachel nodded, her face set with determination. Agreed, but we have to move quickly. If Adams or anyone else finds out what we're doing, they could destroy the evidence or worse. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside her. She wasn't just dealing with discrimination anymore, she was dealing with corruption at the highest levels of her hotel, maybe even beyond. We'll need to keep this quiet, Sarah said, her mind already working through the next steps. We can't let anyone know we're investigating, not yet. Rachel stood pacing the room as she thought. I'll reach out to a few more trusted employees, see if they've noticed anything unusual. We need more witnesses, more people willing to talk, and we'll need to protect them. If Adams or his accomplice find out, they'll try to silence them. Sarah's stomach shed at the thought. She had been so focused on fixing the problems at her hotel she hadn't considered how dangerous this could become, but now there was no turning back. Let's start with the financial records, Sarah said, standing up. Once Robert gets them to us, we'll know. If there's enough to confront Adams after that, we'll see where this leads. Rachel nodded, her eyes serious. We'll be ready the next day. Robert delivered their codes as promised. Sarah sat with Rachel in her office, poring over the documents. At first, everything seemed normal, just typical expenses, guest payments, and staff salaries. But then Rachel found it here, she said, pointing to a series of transactions on the financial report. These payments, they don't add up. Sarah looked closer. The amounts were small enough to avoid suspicion, but over time they added up to a significant sum. Payments had been rerouted to accounts that didn't appear on any of the official hotel records, and the dates of the transactions aligned perfectly with the complaints from guests who had been mistreated. This is it, Sarah whispered. He's been siphoning money from the hotel and using it to cover up his discrimination. Rachel nodded, her expression grim. It's enough to take Adams down. But what about the person protecting him? Sarah stared at the papers, her mind whirling. They had enough to expose Adams, but they still didn't know who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. We need more, Sarah said. Finally, if we confront Adams now, his accomplice will just replace him. We need to find out who's really in charge. That evening, as Sarah lay in bed, her mind refused to rest. She had the evidence she needed to bring Adams down, but the idea of someone else lurking in the shadow haunted her. Who could it be? Someone on the board, a business partner she knew. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and the whole plan could collapse. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was another message from Robert. I found something. Meet me in the staff quarters. At midnight, it's important. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Midnight, that seemed unusual, but if Robert had more information. She needed to know. She quickly texted back, agreeing to meet him. The staff quarters were located in a quiet wing of the hotel, away from the guest rooms. As Sarah made her way down the dimly lit hallway, the air felt thick with tension. Something about the whole situation felt off, but she pushed the feeling aside. Robert had been helpful so far. If he had found something she needed, to hear it when she arrived. The door to the staff quarters was slightly ajar. Sarah knocked softly before stepping inside. "Robert!" she called, her voice echoing in the empty room, but there was no answer. The room was empty, the lights dim and the air unnervingly still. Sarah's pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. She turned to leave, but before she could reach the door, slammed shut behind her. Who lured Sarah into the staff quarters? Is Robert in danger, or is he part of something more sinister? The deeper Sarah digs, the more dangerous her enemies become. The door slammed shut with a loud thud, and Sarah's heart leaped into her throat. She spun around, her mind racing. The room was empty, and her instinct screamed that she wasn't safe. Her breath quickened as she tried to process what had just happened. Was this a trap? And if so, who was behind it? The silence in the room was deafening, and the dim lighting only added to the sense of isolation. Sarah took a step toward the door, reaching for the handle, but before she could touch it, she heard a voice behind her. Looking for someone, Sarah froze. She recognized the voice. It was Mr. Adams. She slowly turned to see him standing in the shadowed corner of the room, arms crossed and a smug look on his face. "I've been expecting you, Miss Hamilton," Adams said, stepping forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've been snooping around asking questions. That's not very smart, you know." Sarah's pulse raised, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I know what you've been doing," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "I've seen the financial records. I know about the discrimination. The money you've been stealing. It's over, Adams." Adam chuckled, shaking his head as if amused. "You really think you've got it all figured out, don't you? You think you're just going to march in here and expose me, bring down the whole operation?" Sarah narrowed. "Hear ye's, that's exactly what I'm going to do." But Adams wasn't fazed. He took another step closer, the dim light casting shadows across his face. "You're in over your head. Sarah, you've been playing a game that's way above your pay grade, and you don't even realize it." Sarah's heart pounded as she tried to piece together what he meant. "You're not the only one involved," she said, her voice firm. "Who's protecting you? Who's behind all of this?" Adam smirked, clearly enjoying her confusion. "You're smarter than you. Look, but it's not going to matter. You've already lost." Suddenly the door behind Sarah creaked open, and she turned to see a figure step into the room. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the man. It was one of the board members, someone she'd trusted. "For years, Mr. Thorne, Sarah gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thorne, an older, distinguished man with silver hair and a calm demeanor, gave her a look of cold indifference. "I told you once before, Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm. "There are things you don't understand about how this business works. You should have stayed in your lane." Sarah's mind raced. Mr. Thorne had always seemed supportive, always given her advice about running the hotel, but now it was clear he had been part of this conspiracy. All along, he was the one protecting Adams. He was the one who had kept the corruption hidden. "You've been behind this the whole time?" Sarah said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You've been covering for Adams." Why, Mr. Thorne stepped closer, his expression unchanged. "Because this hotel is more than just a place for people to stay. It's a business, a very lucrative one, and certain types of guests are, well, let's just say they're not part of the image we've worked hard to cultivate." Sarah's anger boiled over. "You've been discriminating against people based on how they look, stealing from the business, and you think that's okay for inside a SIF dealing with a child who didn't understand the world. It's not about what's okay. Sarah, it's about what's profitable. People like you don't understand that there are rules to this game, and if you want to stay on top, you play by those rules. Adam stepped forward, standing next to Thorne, his smirk returning. You see, Miss Hamilton, this hotel is successful because we control who gets to enjoy the luxury, not just anyone can walk through those doors and expect the same treatment. Sarah's heart pounded with rage, but she kept her voice steady. You've been using this hotel as a tool for your own selfish gain. You've lied, stolen, and hurt people, and you think you're going to get away with it. Thorne smiled faintly. We always do. Sarah knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't just let them get away with this, but she was outnumbered and out-powered. If she wasn't careful, they could destroy everything she had worked for, including her reputation. But then she remembered she wasn't alone. Rachel, Robert, and the other employees who had stepped forward. They were all part of this fight too, and more importantly, they had the evidence. I've already reported you to the authorities, Sarah said, her voice clear and unwiring. We have everything. Witnesses, financial records, complaints. You might think you're untouchable, but this ends now for the first time. Adam's smile faltered and Thorne's eyes narrowed. They hadn't expected her to have gathered so much. You think the law is going to stop us? Adam sneered. People like Thorne. And I have been doing this. For years, you're just a temporary obstacle. Sarah met his gaze, refusing to back down. Maybe, but I'm not. Afraid of you, and I'm not going to stop until this place is clean, until everyone who walks through those doors is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. There was a tense silence in the room, then without warning, the door behind Sarah burst open again, and 2 police officers stepped in, followed by Rachel and Robert. Sarah. Rachel said, her voice breathless, we got the warrant. The officers moved swiftly, placing Adams and Thorne in handcuffs. Adams cursed on, under his breath, while Thorne maintained his icy composure, but Sarah could see the anger and panic behind his eyes. You'll regret this, Thorne said as he wuzzled away. You don't know what you've started. Sarah watched them go, her heart still pounding. She had won this battle, but she knew Thorne's words were a warning. There would be consequences. The powerful people he represented wouldn't just disappear quietly a few weeks later. The hotel was a different place. With Adams and Thorne gone, Sarah had made it her mission to rebuild not just the hotel's image, but its culture. She brought in new staff, made sure every employee felt valued and safe, and set new policies to ensure that every guest, no matter their background, received the same treatment. Maria and the others who had spoken out were awarded for their bravery. Sarah promoted Maria to head of guest relations, ensuring that her voice would be heard at the highest levels of the hotel's operations. As Sarah stood in the lobby one evening watching the guests mingle and laugh, she felt a deep sense of pride. She'd faced powerful enemies, uncovered corruption, and exposed discrimination. It hadn't been easy, and she knew there would be more challenges ahead. But for now, she was content. She'd taken back control of her hotel, and this time she would never let anyone take it from her again. Thanks for watching the Pursuit Chronicles. If the story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the pursuit never ends.